Thank you, Charles. Let me get right here now. Well, first of all, I don't know about y'all, but hell, I've been sitting up here 2 hours and I'm already tired. I don't know about you. And I want to thank the committee for having me down here this weekend. It was about 11 years ago that I was here, and when they ask you back, you think one of two things. Either they didn't hear you, or as my wife says, I must come cheap if I go back the second time. But I would like to thank the committee for having me here this weekend, and it has been very enjoyable. You never know what you're going to get when you get to chairman. But I got a ring-a-ding, I'll tell you. He met me yesterday, and we drove down on an old new car, if you know what I mean. I'm still shaking from the experience. But Charles has done a good job. He's made my weekend and with his wife Kim very enjoyable, and I want to thank the committee again for just letting me be the speaker tonight. You go to a lot of these deals and they have 4 or 5 speaking at one time, and as I've always said, it reminds me of a story that they tell in my part of the country that happened many years ago. They had a convention, and they had one of these long-winded speakers. He got tangled up there and started talking. For the first hour, he talked on the 12 steps. Second hour, he got into the 12 traditions. Third hour, he got into the 3 legacies. And gradually, the people began to leave. And they will leave. I found it out one night, and lo and behold, everybody left the meeting except one fellow kept sitting on the front row. And hell, he got concerned, so he wound up his talk, ran down from the podium, grabbed the man by the hand and says, I want to ask you a question. Everybody left but you. Why did you stay? And he said, hell, I'm the next speaker. Well, I kind of know how that is. I'm an alcoholic. My name's Dave Cook. Hi, everybody. I'm a member of the Big Book Group in Raleigh, North Carolina, which I think is the finest group in the whole wide world. And if you don't think the same thing about your home group, then I suggest you find another group. By God's grace, and because the program worked for me, and through the help of some understanding sponsors that led me with a kind but firm hand, through the love of a loving wife that I found as a result of this program, and through the help of many people in Alcoholics Anonymous, and some of them in this room tonight, I haven't found it necessary to take a drink or any tablets since the day I come to Alcoholics Anonymous. And that day was September the 12th, 1957. Now, I want to explain something. I don't give my sobriety date to impress you. Sometimes it impresses the hell out of me, I'll be honest with you. I give it for 3 reasons and 3 reasons only. I came into Alcoholics Anonymous up in Roanoke, Virginia, in the old Central Group. The second meeting I ever went to in AA was one of these discussion meetings. They had 13 or 14 wicker chairs sitting in a circle, and I was no different from anybody else that goes to their first discussion meeting. I began to wonder what I was going to say when it got to me. And it finally got to me, and the man who was to become my first sponsor spoke up and told me what to say. He said, give your name and your sobriety date. That's all you're qualified to do. And the second reason is they had a saying in that group, if you were a member of that group and you got behind the podium, that if you didn't give your sobriety date, you usually didn't have one. And the third reason is this. In my time in AA, I've been around a lot of AA meetings. And where I come into Alcoholics Anonymous with a transit, a lot of communication center, a lot of people coming through. And you hear people say, I've been around AA 35 years, been around 45 years. Hell, I don't want to know how long you've been around AA. I want to know how long you've been sober. That's the way I feel about it. And that ain't no reflection on the young person. I don't mean it that way, somebody in young sobriety. But I want to know where you're coming from. Because I had some experiences in my early life in AA that I was listening to the wrong people. And I've been sober for a while. And I still want to listen to the winners. John was talking about it the other night, the old timers. And I've been blessed to be around a lot of old timers that led me, as I said earlier before, with a kind but firm hand. And the language of the heart, the theme that you got here. And it's a common thing in AA, whether we know it or not. And it really begins. It really begins when one alcoholic begins to talk to another alcoholic and begins to share and care. And that's what my life has been in this program since the day I walked into Alcoholics Anonymous, sharing and caring. I received a lot of benefits from the program just like you. A lot of things that benefits that I call marginal benefits, such as some peace of mind, some happiness, some security. But anytime I speak of marginal benefits, I have to speak of certain basics. The basic benefit that I received from this program beyond my sobriety, and naturally sobriety came first, the basic benefit that I have received is my sanity. My sanity. And today, as a sane alcoholic, I find now that I don't have to run anymore. I don't have to cheat or steal anymore. I don't have to lie anymore. And by God, the most important thing of all, I don't have to sober up anymore. Now, I didn't know that when I walked into the doors of AA, that that's what the deal was about. But I know it today. And if I didn't say anything else tonight, that anybody that's new in this program, if you will just do the things that I've asked of you, if you just follow the directions, the sobriety will be yours. I'm living proof. I was one of these people that started drinking when I was about 16. Can't understand why, because I knew what booze could do to a man. I'd seen what happened to my father. My father was an alcoholic. I didn't know it until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know anything about alcoholism until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous. Hell, if I'd known anything, I probably would have never come. And because of my father's drinking when I was a young fellow, about 12, it led to a divorce in my home. My mother was the means to able to give me a good education by sending me off to college, and I had about everything I needed growing up. Too much. I was one of these kids that I damn near died because my mother loved me so much. And it had an effect on me. I went off to school and was 16. And this was the time that the fellows had just come back from World War II, and I got in this environment. And I began to do what the big boys were doing. Remember the first time I got drunk? I remember how sick I got. But I went back again and tried it again. Had a lot of problems in the beginning, getting it down, gagging exercises. Oh, hell, we work hard at it. You know how it is, particularly when you're real young. You're going to be a man. And I had a lot of problems with it in the beginning, the gagging, the getting it down. And they were talking about the pleasure that comes from drinking, and I didn't understand what they were talking about. Finally, one night I asked one of the old fellows, when does the pleasure come that you speak of? I was, you know what I mean. And finally, one of them told me, Dave said, if you remember, there's a little pause in between from the time you take the drink and when you throw up, that's when the pleasure comes. But I progressed in my drinking and began to enjoy it, had a good time, and went on through school, and I never had any hangovers, didn't know what a hangover was, just enjoyed it, had a good time drinking in college, and came time to graduate, I started doing strange things. I'd studied engineering in college, but when I got ready to finish, I'd finished, and I was offered a job because of my basketball ability. I played college basketball until the drinking interfered. But I was offered a job coaching high school basketball down in eastern North Carolina where I was raised. And I went into the public school system when I was 20 years of age, coaching high school basketball, fell upstairs in the coaching profession. Had a lot of success until, as I look back now, and it's all hindsight, when I began to have some problems and I was running with a crowd a lot older than I and school board members that drank, somewhere to go about every night and drink. And the first 2 years I didn't have any serious problems. About the third year I really began to have problems, namely in my responsibilities. It wasn't long before they began to talk to me about some of these problems. School board officials resented it, got mad, and then I did the only thing that an alcoholic does do. He begins to try to get people off his back. So I decided I'd get married, divert their attention. And I got their attention all right. I met a girl, we courted for 2 weeks, and we got married there in the local community, and this was a mistake from the very beginning. I'd been there 4 years at this particular job, and this girl didn't know how bad I drank, and I didn't know how bad I drank either. It got so bad along about the end that my mother tried to help me I got a leave of absence and was sent to some hospitals up and down the East Coast. They were not treatment centers as such, as we know them today. I began in my home state at the Keeley Institute. Some of you old-timers might have heard about that. And you really remember it. If you want to drink again after you leave there, you're working hard at becoming an alcoholic, and I worked hard. And then Connecticut, Virginia, and a few places, always for nervous breakdowns. And nobody ever talked to me about drinking. And I'd usually come back in worse shape than when I went. And finally, I was gone for about 6 months at various hospitals and still had my job and started again and got back to drinking, and everything began to fall apart real quick. And this was about the 5th year. And I eventually lost my job at this school I'd been very successful at on account of my drinking. My first wife had had enough and she left. And then I was allowed to do the only thing I could do for a period of time was just drink. In the summer it happened to be, and then I was in my home state of North Carolina. If you're a geographical nut, in my home state, if you keep moving east, you finally get out there where there's no further to go. The Atlantic Ocean, and that's what I kept doing, drinking and moving east. And I was employed by another school way down east that was desperate in the middle of the year, and they hired me, and I didn't last too long, about 6 months, right in the middle of the year. It got to the point, the only way I can describe my drinking, and I'm not going into a drunk-a-log tonight, but the only way I can describe it at that point is I got into the point that I had to get up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning to drink, and I had it then, to drink enough to stop shaking so I could get my clothes on, take a shower, and go to the schoolhouse and perform. I knew what was going to happen about 12. The shakes would come back. I'd have some hit in the gym or in the automobile, and enough to stop the shakes, to get in the car, to drive back to where I was living that afternoon, go to the beer joints, and then go to the store and buy enough booze to go home and get drunk. And went on for about 6 months. One day, hell, the principal just stopped me in the hall and says, we don't need you anymore. We just don't need you anymore. And hell, they didn't even call me in the office and talk about this thing. Just, we don't need you anymore. And give me your keys. And I've often reflected and looked back, and I really believe that as what I know today, that I had crossed this invisible line that we speak of in our program. I'd become an alcoholic, although I didn't know it. I'd become an alcoholic, although I didn't know it. And that's the thing that I don't understand about the disease even today with my sobriety. The thing that I don't understand about the disease is I sit down and share with a new man or a new woman, or a new man that's dying, or a man that doesn't ever make it to this program. The misunderstanding about alcoholism, and I was the same way. I did not have the ability to see myself as I really was in my worst moments. And I damn near died from this. I could not see myself as I really was in my worst moments. And that particular day at school, that day I left, the day I was fired, I'd experienced blackouts before, but never no prolonged blackout. I went somewhere for a period of about 2 weeks, got into a lot of trouble, woke up in jail for the first time in my life in the town, the community where I was teaching. And my mother evidently made some arrangements, because one morning I was come to, and a man began to talk to me through a cell door. County health doctor. Never forgotten his words to this day. He said, "Son," said, "we're going to send you to a place where they can cure you." And I didn't know exactly what he meant. I hadn't eaten in a long time. I knew that. And he says, "Your mother has come down here and straightened out this mess." And that's what I always did. I'd go off and create a mess. And she'd take care of it. And the next day I found out where I was going for the cure. In my home state, the state insane asylum is called Dix Hill. I've often said that I too found my thrill on Dix Hill. I was 27 years of age when I went to Dix Hill the first time. And so help me God, as long as I draw a sober breath, I hope I never forget my first trip to Dix Hill. Oh, the first few days there, they put me in a place they called the inebriate ward. Didn't know what it meant, but it sounded pretty good. And I adjusted to this environment. The people acted rather strange in there. They chased squirrels most of the time, and you know, you do like everybody else does. You chase squirrels too if you want to be one of them. And hell, I was one of them, and so I became a squirrel chaser. A few days later, they carried me over to another building they call the old Edgerton building. I've never forgotten it. And the reason I've never forgotten it is because every piece of clothing you have, they stamp it with the name Edgerton building. And I think they stamped me somewhere else too, because I got to be a frequent visitor of the Edgerton building for a period of time. But I got over in that place, and they carried me down in the basement, a place they call Skid Row, and it was a padded cell, and they took my clothes away from me, and they let me have my running fits. And days later, when I got through having my running fits, they gave my clothes back to me. And then I was allowed to do the only thing I could do for the next 30-some-odd days, and that was walk up and down a corridor, day in and day out, wondering what in the hell I was doing there. Because I began to look around me, and the people there were a lot older than I, the men. A lot older. And I didn't understand what I was doing there. One night, a group of men were playing cards. They were playing poker. They were using matchsticks for chips, and they began to discuss the reason they were there. And I heard one man say, "I'm here because my wife put me here." And I kind of identified with that. I was there because my mother put me there. And really and truly, if the truth was known, that's the only thing she could do. And then I heard a man, I've always referred to him as the face. I can see his face tonight, just as good as it was 28, 29 years ago. He's not in Dix Hill anymore. I don't know what is a member of AA or dead or what, but I heard this man speak up, and he said, "I'm here because I'm an alcoholic." And my God, when I heard the word, I resisted the word for the very word itself, because it was at this time in my life that I began to play a game. A game that was to plague me until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous, probably, after about a year's sobriety, and that was comparing my drinking with my father's drinking. And as the truth was known today, if the truth was known today, my father was a much better man than I ever hoped to be drinking. My father died as a result of alcoholism. But he never got kicked out of his profession. He lost a family. He never had to go to Dix Hill. He was never in jail. And he never had to be put behind bars for a period of time because of his behavior. But I did. And the day came that I had to leave Dix Hill after I'd been there some 30 some odd days. I didn't have anywhere to go because I'd lost everything that I'd accumulated. And what do? You go back home to mother. That's what you do. And I went back home to my hometown. And you know, at that time in life, at that age, you don't come home in the middle of the year unless it's a special occasion, a marriage, a death, a celebration. And you sure as hell don't tell people you've been to Dix Hill when they want to know what you're doing at home. Of course, they begin to know in my community at home that I was having a lot of nervous breakdowns, but you don't tell them you've been to Dix Hill. I'd been at home for a period of about 9 weeks, began to run around with a crowd that I'd been in school with. They were passing bottles, but I didn't have to take a drink. I didn't. There was a reason for it. You see, after I got home from Dix Hill, my family doctor, who was ignorant of my situation, who's very well versed about what Alcoholics Anonymous is today in alcoholism, he was always worried about my nerves. And I don't know a thing about drugs or pills, but I know a hell of a lot about tablets. And as long as I took them tablets, I didn't have to drink. I didn't have to drink, and they gave me a good feeling. As the boy at home describes it so well, he says, I was loose as a goose most of the time, and that's the effect I took them faithfully, kind of like popcorn, you know. And one night, after about 9 weeks, they were passing a bottle, and I decided it was time for me to take a drink. And I took a drink, and as the compulsion that I know of today set in, and to make a long story short, I was back in Dix Hill the next day. Place I said I'd never go again as long as I live. As a matter of fact, I was back in Dix Hill 5 times in 6 months. On account of one fact, I'd become an alcoholic. I'd take one drink and I could no longer guarantee you my behavior. The last time I went back to Dix Hill, I tried to drink on top of antabuse. And it don't work. In case I'll just save you some damn time, it don't work. Some of you going to try it, but it don't work. Hell, it's useless. And it's the closest, I ain't never died yet, but that's about the closest thing to death I know of. And this time when I went back, they put me in the nut part of the bug house instead of the drying out part. And there is a distinct difference in case you're interested. And this was the time I found out about being tied down to a bed in a straitjacket. I found out how you better live better electrically this time, too. And I look back at a lot of it today, and some of it I remember and some of it I don't. But I do remember the fact that I accepted my fate that I was going to, I was going to die with these people that I was around in this nut ward. This power that we speak of in the program, that we come to know with sobriety, I really believe that the power begins to work in our lives before we get to Alcoholics Anonymous, whether we know it or not. Because a lot of strange things happened to me before I ever got to AA. And one of them happened in that hospital because one day I was taken out of that nut ward and put back in that old Edgston building with the rest of the rummies. Maybe it was a coincidence, I don't know. I'd been there so much they more or less made me an honorary attendant. I'd worked in the kitchen and went to get the mail and things like that. And one day, 2 other fellows and myself decided we'd leave. And don't want to sound dramatic, but we escaped. And let me tell you, back then, it was just like cops and robbers. Not today. Hell, they walk up and down the streets. They turn them loose over there. If you want to see a nut house on the streets, just come to Raleigh. They turn them out and let them. They have picnics all over town. We brought a few of them one night over to my home group, and 13 of them escaped before they got back. I mean, it's always good for AA to try something different, and we tried it, but it was like cops and robbers then, and they found us. They didn't find us then, but wound up in a hotel there in Raleigh, me and the other fellows, and finally we had to split ways, and by some strange maneuvering, I finally got back to my hometown a few days later, and my mother's home broke into a home. She was in a hospital up in Virginia with a nervous breakdown. And they brought her home and found me. And when I say they, I mean my two sisters, and a friend of the family has been like a father to me. And I'd been there about a week drunk. And that afternoon, after they got things kind of settled and got Mother in the house, they called me downstairs and they got together. And when they get together, you better watch out because something's going to happen. And in case you've never experienced it, they are those people that get in the den and you in the next room. They crack the door and they're beginning to talk about how much they love you. And about what they got to do with you. Going to destroy himself. Hell, they want to get rid of you as soon as they can. I know it. And they came into the room I was in, and they said, look, you're killing Mother. Here's a wad of money. We want you to leave it. They didn't call it a wad, but that's what it was. They wanted me to leave that part of the country and not come back. And it was a good rule, and there's nothing that a practicing alcoholic likes any better to get some green on his hip because, them problems begin to kind of ease on off. So I thanked them, and I left town. It was enough to go to the West Coast and live comfortably if I'd had some sense of manageability. But I went 4 miles to a neighboring town. And pulled into an old broken-down hotel that used to be a railroad center, and got some new friends. Hell, I had a lot of friends, as long as I had that money, and it wasn't long. You know what happened, the money ran out. And then I reverted back to the things I had done before that my mother had been able to take care of. I don't know about any of you, but I had another bad affliction. I used to write a lot of checks. And I never wrote one that I wasn't going to make good the next morning. But I went over back to my hometown when the money ran out one day morning, and went to a friend of the family who was in business, and I bought an outboard motor. I didn't have a boat, but I bought a damn motor, and give him a check, get some change, and pick up the motor later. And what happened was a few days later they called my mother to tell her that my motor was ready, and she began to put two and two together, and they found me in that neighboring town a few days later, and I was back in my hometown the next day down in the local jail 3 blocks from my mother's home, and I'd been in there about a week, and everybody that came in every night in that drunk tank was out the next morning except me. And I began to get concerned, and one night I started raising hell in there about I wanted to see my attorney. And the jailer finally came down and said, I told him what I wanted to see my attorney. And he said, who the hell is your attorney? I told him, he said, talk to him all you want to. He's in the next cell block. Sure enough, he was. Right in the next cell block. Now, this man I'm happy to report is a member of Alcoholics Anonymous today and is a member of our state legislature. But he didn't do me any damn good that night, I'll tell you that. And so a couple of days later, nobody would have anything to do with me at home. Nobody came to see me. I got some cigarettes by some strange coincidence. Somebody had left them with the jailer, but one morning I had to go upstairs and stand trial in a court of law for something I didn't know I'd done on a previous drunk. And you'd have to understand this scene. My sister was city clerk, and they called my name, and she didn't seem to know who the hell I was. Didn't respond one bit. The city solicitor was my mother's next door neighbor. He didn't seem to know who I was either. And they carried me on downstairs, and the next day they carried me to another courthouse with a little bit more authority. And again, I was tried for something I didn't know I'd done on a previous drunk. And I wound up going east. Always been ashamed of it. Still ashamed of it. But you see, the reason I was there because of, I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. Everybody told me what the hell was wrong, but nobody told me what to do. Nobody. And I've always been ashamed of what I had to do. But I can stand here before you tonight and say I thank God for it. Because I really believe that I'm one of these people, and I know it for a fact today, that I had to be beat down to my knees before I could see myself as I really was. Now, we have people this day and time that don't have to go through the things that I did to become members of AA and do something about your drinking. They see they have a problem and put the jug down and come on here and make good AA members, and that's what it's all about. I wasn't that way. I just had to be beat down before I could see myself. And like I said, down east is where I wound up in what is known as the Great Dismal Swamp. Hardest work I've ever done in my life. The day came that I had to leave. I didn't want to leave because of the shame. The superintendent, I was the only man with a college education in this place. And that's how I got my smokes and my soda pop, by writing letters for these people that couldn't write. But this superintendent of this place took a liking to me, I guess, because he used to have me over at his home about one night a week to eat and allowed me to cut his grass. And this man began to talk to me about not Alcoholics Anonymous as such, but maybe there was something wrong with my drinking in the past. He did everything but direct me to Alcoholics Anonymous as I know it today. And the day came I had to leave. I didn't want to leave, as I said before, but you had to leave, and I left. And they carried me back to my hometown, and I got out at the city limits, and I went back to my mother's home, and the nice neighborhood, you know, and what do? You do the only thing you can do. You go back home to mother. And I don't know why, but this time I went to the back door instead of the front door. I guess I was second class. And she began to talk to me. Now, you have to understand, my mother had become afraid of me because on a previous drunk I tried to take a life, and I didn't know nothing about it. And she began to talk to me, and wasn't long before they got together again. And they cracked that door. And my brother-in-law came over this time. And hell, I don't want to get wound up on him, but anyway, they began to argue, and I heard my mother say, he stays here tonight whether you like it or not. He's my son. And that was the time in my life I made a vow that I'd, not sobriety. I didn't know what sobriety was. I just wasn't drinking anymore for her. And I don't recommend this before AA or after AA. And my mother began to love me and gave me things, and things got better, and I didn't drink. And one day it was suggested maybe I should go to work. It'd been about 2.5 years. I've been getting all this group therapy, and somebody said maybe you should go to work, and I didn't think I could get a job teaching in the state of North Carolina. I was interviewed for several jobs north of North Carolina, 5 different states in a period of about a week. My mother took me to these places. And one afternoon we wound up in Roanoke, Virginia on a particular Thursday. The man began to talk to me, and I told him about my past, and he got on the phone and verified it. And I hadn't taken a drink in about 6 months then, I think. And he said, we understand that you're cured now. And I said, yes, sir, I am. And he said, well, we want you to go to work. And the man employed me. And that was the largest high school in southwest Virginia at that time, Thomas Jefferson Senior High School in Roanoke, Virginia. In spite of where I had been and what I had done, I had a fresh new start in life. I went back to my hometown. My mother financed this whole thing, and I had to go back the following Saturday and had a place to stay in a nice home. When I got there, and so I rode the Greyhound bus, and I had to change buses up in Virginia. Had a little layover, and I decided I'd have one drink. I had one drink, but I buy 2 pints. You know how we figure. And this was the beginning of my last drunk, the only drunk that I really talk about, the drunk that I found out what John was talking about last night. This thing called loneliness. I can't describe it, this last drunk. And I was able to last at the job for 5 days until I come down with Asian flu. The school officials did everything they could to help me. I reverted back to the same thing I'd done in the past by writing checks. I didn't go to the place I was supposed to stay. I checked into the big hotel and owed them about $1,800 in a period of about 2 weeks. A lot of bad checks. And things began to fall apart, and I couldn't stop drinking. And I'd do anything to get a drink. And I'd been in this place. I'd worked for 1 week, and after the second week, the man came to see me, and I was no longer employed by that local school board, and told me so. And it was along about this time my mother got in touch with me before they kicked me out of the hotel. And my mother gave me the greatest gift she's ever given me since the day I was born. And that's when she kicked me out of a life, and I knew she meant it. And that afternoon, I was on the streets, doing the best I could. About 2 weeks later, on a Sunday, September 11th, 1957, I was in a back alley in downtown Roanoke, Virginia, trying to get a drink of liquor down. And I come to that point in my life that I think all alcoholics do one time or another. When you begin to hurt enough that you'll do anything. And I'd come to that time. And the thought occurred to me that I was going to die from what I was doing. And I didn't want to die in that back alley. It's that simple. I did not want to die in that back alley. And I didn't take the drink. But I cried out for some help. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe. But the only man that knew me in that city on a first-name basis found me about 3 hours later. And that was the superintendent of the city schools. When he found me, it wasn't the fact that he knew anything about alcoholics or AA or anything else. He was just interested in helping a human being. And he wanted to help me and didn't know how. And he took me to his home that afternoon, and he got in touch with a school teacher that knew a man in Alcoholics Anonymous. And he carried me to a place that Sunday afternoon, a place in downtown Roanoke called the Easy Does It Club, a 12-step clubhouse. And that's where I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous that afternoon. I'd gotten to the point on this last drunk that I couldn't find oblivion anymore. I hurt all over. My hair hurt. My toenails hurt. You know, sick and tired of being sick and tired. Tired of the high cost of low living. And that's what it is. And they took me up the steps, 2 or 3 men. And it wasn't the fact I was drunk, I was just so weak. I wasn't drunk. I was rum-dum. And then that second floor, I don't know why all those old meetings had steps to go up. God almighty, and they got me up there, and I don't know, when I walked into that room, it seemed like to me you kind of looked me over. We say we don't look them over. By God, they looked me over, and because everything I had on, and as you begin to talk to him, the superintendent, there was an old gentleman standing in the right-hand corner. Never stood behind a podium. I don't mention this man. Old man John, we call him. His name is John Tullock. And old man John gave me a wiggle of the finger, and I walked over to him, and he put his arm around my shoulder. And he said, son, says, I want to tell you something. He says, all you got to do is listen to these people and do what they tell you to do, and you never have to be alone again. You never have to be alone again. And as I know it today, what old man John was telling me was the first few lines of chapter 5. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. That's what the old man was telling me. Now let me tell you something about old man John. We hear a lot this day and time about the young alcoholic, the old alcoholic, all kinds of alcoholics. The man that rang my bell had 5 years of sobriety at that time. He come into AA when he was 76. And he died at 82 with 6 continuous years of sobriety. I helped bury him. And he's the man that rang my bell. Old man John. Never forgotten the man. And then he began to talk to me a little, and it wasn't long before I began to shake a little. And I said something about maybe could I get a drink or something. And they said, no, we don't do it that way, but if you get too bad, we're going to get a doctor for you. And then I said something about some tablets, and I thought I'd started a damn revolution because no pills. They said, drink the coffee. Drink the coffee. I've often said, and I still contend, and this is no reflection on people making the coffee this weekend, there are a hell of a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous making coffee that ain't got no business doing it. And this was one of those days. Ropey stuff. I mean, it just hung. And they said, drink the coffee. And hell, I drank the coffee. I thought it was a requirement. And I drank coffee all the damn afternoon. And I got sick from it, drinking that damn coffee. And, he carried me to my first meeting that night. And I didn't know where I was. I didn't know what went on. I remember the wonder, wanting to jump out, sitting on top of my hands. But I do remember the most important thing. I remember after the meeting when strangers, complete strangers, walked up to this drunk and told me the magic words of Alcoholics Anonymous. We love you and we understand and you're going to be all right. That's all they told me. We love you and we understand and you're going to be all right. And if nobody told you that when you walked into the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous, as far as I'm concerned, you got shortchanged. Because that's all we got to do. That's all we got to offer is love and understanding. And I really believe that as I look back in my sobriety today that I was loved sober. Because the sickness was in here. And these people loved me in spite of me. That night after the meeting, 3 men got me a room at the YMCA and they stayed with me all night long. And they began to talk to me about Alcoholics Anonymous. They took turns. They didn't nurse me. They took turns sitting on top of me because I began to shake. And I never want to forget it. And they talked to me all night long and said, Dave, you've been so many hours out without a drink and maybe you can make it for another hour. And finally the sun was coming up and oh, Claude's dead now. But oh, Claude, Dave, you made it this far. Maybe you can do it today. And that's what we do in AA, one day at a time. First time I ever heard it was that morning. The first time I ever heard it was when I began to have a little faith, a little hope that maybe I could make it that day. But somewhere in the dark recesses of my mind, I knew right then and there, ever what it was, and I didn't know what it was, that if I made that day, I had to be around them. And today, as I stand here before you, I know if I make this day, that I got to be around you to do it. And that morning they carried me back down to that clubhouse, and I met a man who would become my first sponsor. And he began to talk to me kind of funny. They just, I didn't have any choice. Hell, they just gave me one. And he began to ask me some questions. And all the answers I gave him were negative. Do you have a family? No. Do you have a job? No. How many checks you got out? I wonder how he knew that. He grabbed on that real quick. And everything was negative, and finally he said, well, it seems to me that you ain't doing so hot. And, I began to think a little, no, I wasn't doing so hot. And he says, well, this is where you start. And he asked me 3 questions that I've never forgotten. I asked the same things today. He wanted to know if I wanted to quit drinking worse than anything else on God's green earth. And I did. I really did. Are you willing to do what we tell you to do? And I was. And then he asked me a question you don't hear of much today, but it's in the book. Dr. Bob talked about it. Are you willing to quit drinking forever? My God, I lied. And I said, yes, I am. And to me, forever is one day at a time, as I know it today. And that afternoon, he got me into a boarding house where I lived a life that I was very fortunate because I was in a boarding house with 6 other men. We had a room apiece. We broke bread at the same table. Each of us had a room, and none of us had a job. And we had meetings after meetings. I don't know where the money came from for the first few months in AA or who paid for the food, the clothes, and the rent, but it came from somewhere. And I learned much from these 6 men. They gave me much because out of those 6 men, 2 of them are dead today. One of them had 14 years sobriety and went back to drinking, stopped going to meetings. The other shot himself on account of going back to drinking. 2 of them are drinking today. And 2 of them are sober. And I've often asked myself many times, why me? Why me? And if I had to give an answer, I guess it would be because I just follow the direction, which is all they told me to do. Just follow the direction. Well, things got a little bit better, and I got dry. It wasn't long before I met my present wife, Sue. Some in this room know her. And this was another gift, as I know it, from the God that I come to know in AA at one time. I guess it was a coincidence, but I've often said, my present wife, Sue, we've been married since 1960. And she's never seen me drink or never seen me drunk. But she's been through more hell than my first wife did because my present wife has seen me try to grow up. And that's a hell of a thing to ask for a spouse, is to watch you grow up. But that's what I've had to do. And I really believe that I'm still trying to grow up. But she was a gift. And I met her after I'd been sober for a period of time. And she's been a lot of help to me. A lot of help. And things got better, and they gave me a lot of directions. I had good sponsorship. Wasn't long before that group was an unusual group. They believed in solving your problems. They had a room at the clubhouse. I called it the inventory room. Hell, that's what it was. It wasn't nothing unusual for them to call you in and sit down and take your inventory. It was just that simple. And one night they called me in and wanted to talk to me about my unemployment problem. I've often said that I've learned a lot more from people with less education in AA than people with education. The man that solved my employment problem had a 3rd grade education. His name was Red. He was a sign painter. They began to discuss my problem about employment. Red speaks up and says, Dave, it seems to me that if you studied engineering in college, that's what you ought to be doing in life. Hell, nobody explained it to me that way before. So with Red's help and Sue's help, I went to see the Virginia Highway Department, told them the truth about me. He told me the same thing everybody else told me. If you're willing to help yourself, we're willing to help you too. And want to know when I could go to work. And this was about the middle of December. And I told him I'd go to work about the 1st of February. I had a lot of business to tend to. And some of you know what I'm talking about now, that fear. And it was there. It was there. I was scared to death. And Red and Sue were in the car waiting for me, and I went outside, and they wanted to know if I got the job. I said, sure did. When do you go to work? And I told them, and well, to make a long story short, in a few minutes I was back in there with them and went to work the next damn day. Yeah, we got to have a little guidance once in a while, and they got him. And so things got better. I got a job, and it's a little sobriety, and things began to get better, and got a little sobriety, and began to know a few things in AA like we do. And it wasn't long before they finally let me talk one night. The steering committee met, and they wouldn't let you talk in that group unless you had 9 months. And I crossed the 9-month threshold, and I let them know. And so they let me talk, and one of the guys at the boarding house had been on a toot, and the rest of the guys brought him to the meeting. And, you know, it struck me that the object of the exercise that night was for me to talk to him. And hell, he didn't even know where he was, but I gave a talk on how not to slip. Well, let me put it this way. I started one, and I'd been going on about 10 minutes, and I heard somebody say, sit down. And you don't hear him. And I kept on talking, and he said, sit down again. And I didn't hear him. And the first thing I know, he was at the podium escorting me down the aisle. My sponsor had come up and decided I'd said enough. And I've never forgotten that moment, and some of you might know about what I'm talking about. As I began to walk down that aisle, you know, their aisles were big. And the back row, we called it Humility Row. That's where all the old-timers sat, and I always sat with them for some strange reason. And as I began to walk down that aisle, the thought occurred to me, well, hell, I got a little bit too much power for him tonight, and he just don't want me to overdo it. That's all it is. Now, if you know anything about alcoholism and sobering alcoholics, you can begin to understand that I was having some problems. And I was beginning to have some problems because it was along about this time, after about a year in AA, that I got to the point that I was hanging around a strange bunch. A bunch to begin to talk about, you know, take what you need and throw the rest away, and you're going to be all right. And the end result of that was that I found myself, after a period of time, I could go 100 miles to make a talk, but I couldn't go 3 blocks to listen. And this is called sickness. And sickness leads to drunkenness. And some people began to see this. Sue saw it, Red saw it, and my sponsor saw it. And I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. But one night they called me in that inventory room. After a year and a half of sobriety, set me down and began to take my inventory, and the upshot of the whole thing was they told me that unless I started doing certain things in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, that I was going to get drunk. And this is a hell of a thing to tell the backbone of the group that he's going to get drunk. But by God, that's what they were telling me. And I got mad. And I had enough, and I decided I'd leave. And as I got to the door, my sponsor said, I want to ask you one question before you leave. And I said, what is it? When was the last time you thanked God for a day of sobriety? And God, that made me madder. And I went back to that boarding house, and I got in my room and locked myself up, and the thought of taking a drink never occurred to me, but I wanted to get back at them. I wanted to do something to them. I want to screw something. You know what I mean? And I resented sobriety along about then. Some of you know what I'm talking about too. I resented sobriety. And so I sat down and I wrote and written that resignation to Alcoholics Anonymous. Just wrote her out. And, God, I didn't know it was that late. And the more I wrote, the more I heard this voice. When was the last time you thanked God for a day of sobriety? And it got louder and louder. It was like an echo. And I was finally forced to my knees for the first time in my adult life. My adult life. And I began to pray to a God I knew nothing about after a year and a half in Alcoholics Anonymous. A juvenile prayer. God to me then was a question mark in the sky. Maybe yes, maybe no. But as the result of this prayer, I was able to walk into a bathroom and look at Dave Cook for the first time in my life, eyeball to eyeball in a mirror, and know exactly what I was. That I was just a speck on this universe, that I was born in the world and someday I'll die and soon be forgotten. And if I wanted sobriety, because I tried everything else, that if I wanted sobriety, I had to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. And the next night I rejoined Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've rejoined, I haven't had a drink, but I rejoined 25 times. And I do it every year because it works for me when I get my chip. I just make another dedication. And I've started doing what they told me to do. I got a hold of that book and those steps, and I started, I had that willingness. That's what it's all about. And things got better. Things got better, and it was along about this time that in order for me to marry Sue, I had to move back to the state of North Carolina to get a divorce, and North Carolina was my home state, so I came to Raleigh and went to work for the North Carolina Highway Department, told them all about me, and they knew about me in a short time, and then Sue and I were married in 1960 and got involved with AA to another degree because my first sponsor made arrangements for a man to take me over when I got to North Carolina. Some of you might have known this man. He was one of the first 100 in AA. He was a native New Yorker. He married a girl in Raleigh and lived there, and his name was Tom Burrell. And Tom was one of these men that gave me much. He's the man that rammed a big book down my throat. Because when I moved to Raleigh, I was one of these people that I would ask you questions to let you know how smart I was. And Tom would say, read the book and then we'll talk about it. He's the man that got me interested in service work. He was the man that got me interested in knowing the people at GSO. He's the man that arranged a meeting for me in my early sobriety with Bill Wilson. I had that privilege when I was a delegate. And he did much for me, and I learned much from him. He gave me a great lesson about standing behind one of these podiums. I'd been sober about 4 or 5 years. Started going to a lot of these conventions and conferences and watching these jokers stand up here talking. And hell, it looked like to me it was cupcake. They got standing ovations. They got everybody hugged and kissed them when they got through, and it looked pretty good to me. And so one night after the meeting, the Monday night meeting, I told Tom I wanted to talk to him, and he said, all right, we're going to the ante room. That group had an inventory room too. And he's one of these people made you sit down, and he stood up and talked down at you. And so I sat down, and he stood up, and he said, what's the problem? I said, Tom, I think I'm a convention speaker. Well, I can't repeat what he said, but I can tell you this, that there was a moratorium put on my speaking for about 3 years. I think I was a little over 8 years sober, and I wasn't allowed to talk. Up to that, from the 5 to 8 years, a little over 3 years. And one night he called me and says, I want you to come over to the house and bring Sue with you. And I wonder, what the hell have I done now? And so I go over and we walk into the den, and I sit down, he stands up. And he says, Dave says, you're going down to Columbia, South Carolina to talk at the state convention. You do this, you do this, and you do this, and you do this. Before you go, there's something I want to tell you. They asked me to go first. You're going as a damn substitute, and don't you ever forget it as long as you live. And I don't know. That's kind of the way I feel about it now. I'm just a substitute. And he's right. Well, I've been involved in AA in Raleigh since that time. And I don't know, maybe somebody here tonight was like I was after about a year and a half. You begin to question a little about this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. Will it work? Will it not? What is it all about? Maybe you're quarreling with yourself or fighting with yourself. If you are, maybe you got to do like I had to do. Get honest with yourself. Even after I had a year and a half sobriety. I heard a man somewhere in AA years ago say this, that when Jesus Christ walked the face of the earth in the body of man, he didn't say, I'm a truthful man. He said, I am the truth. I really believe that it's from this source and this root that we inherited this program called Alcoholics Anonymous. Because I've seen enough in my time in AA not only to believe, but to know that there's a power behind this universe that stands ready to help you and I if we're willing to help ourselves. I don't care where you come from or what you got, materially or otherwise. If you have the ability to be honest with yourself, this power will work in your life. In the beginning, I called it the man upstairs. Tonight, I call it the God of my understanding, the God that I found in Alcoholics Anonymous, the God that I found through you by your love for me. My mother didn't believe I was sober for a period of about 2 years in my sobriety. And she finally had to come and see it. And then she began to resent Alcoholics Anonymous. And she didn't understand a lot of things. For a long period of time, she never understood why I could do this for a bunch of strangers and I could never do it for her. And it took about 9.5 years for my mother ever to accept me in her life as a son again. And it's strange how it happened. God works in mysterious ways. I had to go down to my hometown where I was raised in one of these local deals, talk at an anniversary meeting, and I asked my mother to go with me to the meeting. She wouldn't go. And made the deal, made the talk, went on back home to Raleigh that night, and about 9 o'clock the phone rang. It was my mother, and she was crying. She was weeping, sobbing. And my mother was asking me to forgive her for what she'd done to me since I'd been sober, and I didn't understand what she was talking about. She wanted me to forgive her for what she'd done to me in my sobriety. And let me tell you what had happened. That afternoon when I was at that meeting, 2 old ladies that knew me when I was a little boy, knew all about my nervous breakdowns, and they came to that meeting, and they went home to see my mother after that meeting. They explained to her what Alcoholics Anonymous was all about. God does work in mysterious ways. And today she thinks it's the greatest thing on the face of the earth, Alcoholics Anonymous. In spite of the God-given sobriety that I received, I still know there are certain things I have to do. The first thing I have to do is I have to continue to have a monumental desire to stay sober. When I came to you, I told you I was willing to go to any length to get this program. And sometimes I have to do it today. Because I can recall various times when that phone rings at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning and some guy wants some help. And I begin to think, maybe he can wake out to breakfast. But thank God, that seed is there. That first night, those 3 men that carried me to the YMCA didn't dump me and say, we'll be back after breakfast. I still have to be willing to go to any length to get this program. The second thing I have to do is I have to go to meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's where it's at in case you're interested. Meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, where you sit down and share eyeball to eyeball. And I really believe that the whole deal is about we just survive among individual egos. You think about it sometime. And we have to scrap a little. I tell everybody that if you come to my group, you got to have guts. And you do. And we got some working people there, and thank God for my group. I do think my home group, and you do too, think it's the best in the world. Because it's through them that I found that I have to walk like I talk. Because they know what I am. We sit down and look at one another and talk to one another and share. And it's the little people, the little people. There's a couple in my group that some of you heard me talk about before. And it gives the point because their name is Vernon and Gertrude. Hell, Vernon ought to have 25 years sobriety. And Gertrude had her problems in sobriety. But years ago, it was a Christmas Eve night, and they had lost a license, both of them. And we had been to the meeting. We had the step meeting that night was on the 8th step. I'd led the meeting. There wasn't many people there. And we decided we'd go somewhere and get some more coffee after the meeting. And I remember now we were on the 8th step, and Vernon and Gertrude had been married about 12 years. We got in the car, and we were riding down the road, and Gertrude says to Vernon, Vernon, when you going to make some amends to me? And I've never forgotten what Vernon said. Hell, Gertrude, you're not even on my list, honey. Now, and Vernon meant it too. He really meant it. Yeah, it's these people, the little people. The third thing I have to do is I have to try to work these 12 steps to the best of my ability, because that's what the program of Alcoholics Anonymous is about. Because it's through the 12 steps I begin to know about Dave and what I want in this life and where I want to go. And if I want to go anywhere, I got to do it with these 12 steps. I'll go back to where I came from. And I don't want to do that. As it says in the book, we're granted a daily reprieve contingent upon the maintenance of our spiritual condition. And I happen to know for me that as long as I've been willing and trying to work these 12 steps to the best of my ability, my spiritual condition has been improved. Oh, there's a person you probably see in me, and then there's the person I'd like for you to see in me, but there's the person I see in myself, and that's what the whole ball game's about. I've come to know me. I've come to know something about God's will in my life. And really and truly, I've come to know this, that God's will is usually the opposite of mine. I have to work these 12 steps to the best of my ability. And then the fourth thing I have to do is, and you know what I'm talking about, some days I just have to hang on and do the best I can, and there are going to be days like that. I just have to hang on and do the best I can. They told me years ago, Tom, that, nothing's so bad that it won't get better if you just hang on and do the best you can. And it's from this that I feel like that yesterday is my experience, and tomorrow is my hope. And today is going from one to the other and doing the best I can. And as long as I can walk hand in hand with you down this happy road of destiny that we speak of in the program, then I too will be allowed another day of sobriety. Another day of sobriety. Coincidence? Is it a coincidence that I'm seeing a man that I've known for years here tonight, friends that are from all over? Is it a coincidence that this hell driver, we begin to share and love one another? A coincidence, a strange word. Well, if it is a coincidence, I simply define a coincidence as an act of God in the midst of time. The same God that has been doing for you and I that which we could not do for ourselves, the God, the Father of all mankind. The God that has never let me down. There's a few words in the big book that describe my life in AA. When I got to AA and where I am today, better than anything that I could say. I hope I can quote it. And I'd like to close with it because it means a lot to me. It means it's just as much about, there's a sign that hangs in my home group at home that says, be careful what you do and say. You might be the only copy of the big book that someone else reads. And I believe that. I believe that with all my heart. And these few lines in the book go something like this. This great experience that released me from the bondage of hatred and replaced it with love is just another affirmation of the truth I know. I get everything I need in Alcoholics Anonymous. and everything I need I get. And when I get what I need, I invariably find that it was just what I wanted all the time. Thank you.